Title: Energy Crisis by Orville Mills. It started with whispers. An old man found frozen to death in his flat. A young woman who had burned her furniture for warmth, suffocating from the smoke. A child taken to the hospital with hypothermia that he caught inside his own home. But soon, the whispers turned into headlines. Britain freezes, energy crisis leaves millions in the dark. Government promises support. Where is it? First deaths recorded as cold snap continues. Maya Patel shivered as she pulled her coat tighter around herself, looking down at her two children, both huddled beneath blankets on the sofa. The heating had been off for days. She had stretched her last energy credit as far as it would go, but it wasn't enough. Now, all she could do was wait and hope the frost creeping along the window would not reach inside. In London, Elliot Fraser sat in his dimly lit apartment, staring at his laptop screen. He had spent years working for a government-backed renewable energy firm, designing wind and solar infrastructure that could have prevented this crisis. But those projects had been buried under red tape, their funding slashed, while energy companies reaped record profits. He had seen the reports, the cover-ups, the bribes. He knew the truth. This was not just an energy crisis. It was a crime. The House of Commons was packed. Prime Minister David Langley stood at the podium, his hands gripping the sides as he faced a barrage of accusations. "Mr. Prime Minister, people are dying because they cannot afford to turn on their radiators," shouted one member of Parliament. "We are working tirelessly to ensure that," Langley began, but he was cut off by another voice. "Empty promises. The country is on the brink of collapse." Langley adjusted his tie, forcing a calm expression. Behind him, energy lobbyists sat in the gallery, watching closely. He knew the truth they all did. The United Kingdom had failed to prepare for this. The push for green energy had been bogged down by endless delays, while fossil fuel corporations held the government in a stranglehold. Outside, in the streets of London, the protests had begun. Maya clutched a cardboard sign as she marched alongside hundreds of others. Heat is a human right. Around her, people chanted, their breath visible in the icy air. Elderly pensioners, young mothers, struggling workers, all united by the same fear that they would not survive the winter. Elliot had spent weeks gathering the documents, pulling files from internal servers, and compiling a damning report. He had expected resistance, but even he was shocked by the scale of corruption. Government officials had knowingly delayed wind and solar projects. Energy giants had paid millions in lobbying to keep fossil fuels dominant. And worst of all, there were emergency energy reserves that could have been released months ago. Instead, they had been hoarded for strategic reasons, while people froze to death. At midnight, Elliot hit send. The files exploded across the internet, picked up by journalists and activists alike. Within hours, the truth was trending worldwide. Energygate. The outrage was immediate. People had suspected corruption, but now they had proof. By morning, the protests had doubled in size. Parliament was in crisis. The Prime Minister called an emergency meeting. But it was already too late. The riots started in Glasgow. A group of protesters, desperate and furious, stormed the local power station. Police clashed with demonstrators outside government buildings in London and Manchester. Maya watched the news in horror. She had joined the fight to save lives, but now the country was burning. Meanwhile, Elliot found himself being hunted. A shadowy government agency was trying to track him down, desperate to silence the whistleblower who had exposed the truth. He moved from safe house to safe house, relying on journalists and activists to keep his story alive. The Prime Minister was running out of options. The country was spiraling out of control. His advisors urged him to declare martial law, but Langley knew that would only make things worse. There was only one way out of this crisis. A week later, Langley stood before the nation. His suit was wrinkled, his voice hoarse. "We can no longer wait. As of today, the government is taking emergency control of key energy sectors. The era of corporate control over our power grid is over. Effective immediately, we are launching an emergency green energy transition plan." The people of this country will no longer suffer in the cold. It was a bold move, one that would make him a hero to some and an enemy to others. But it was necessary. The government released emergency energy reserves, providing temporary relief. But the real solution came from the people themselves. Maya's grassroots movement pushed forward community-run solar and wind projects. Engineers, activists, and local governments worked together to fast-track renewable energy solutions. By the time spring arrived, the country was finally beginning to heal. The energy grid was transforming, decentralized, and powered by the people rather than corporations. It was a long road ahead, but one thing was certain: they had found a way. No one would freeze to death in their home again. Because survival was not enough. They needed a future. The end.